Hello, hello, good morning, Dumela, Absheni, Nda, Goeiemorgen, Guten Tag. Hello and welcome to another episode of Rural Living and Innovation. I am Anelingoya, umachukuzi umhlanga kulindlela, ukusha uthahla unyawuza. What is this episode about? Before I ramble any further, I think I'm very famous for rambling. So in this episode, I want to talk a bit about housing and rural innovation and how it compares to the eco-friendly rebrand, which is also just rural in some contexts. As much as that is said, it's not to say that I'm saying let's go back to huts and rondavels and whatever. But at the same time, I am saying that it is a rebrand. Isn't it a curious rebrand? Let me know in the comments if you think like rural innovation has been rebranded as eco-friendly innovation or environmentally friendly innovation. One example that I'll use is huts. So huts in the rurals, the round thatched roof, whole thing, using firewood and stuff has been considered, backwards, and all these things, the fact that people can survive without electricity and stuff. Oh my gosh, could never. But with how reliable electricity has been, especially recently, and food shortages and food inflation, I think a lot of people are really reconsidering their position on rural innovation and living in the rural areas because they're realizing how expensive it actually it is to stay alive, and the fact that inflation does not stop. We don't have systems to ensure that we can keep up with the increased cost of living. And I think the rural space is still a space where that can happen. So I remember back in 2016, between 2016 and 19, there's this lady that I used to follow. Her name is Erica Hart. Her name is Erica Hart. She creates. She used to be a speaker. She used to be just an Afro activist, an activist for everything black joy and all those things. But also she used to talk a lot about gentrification and her experiences of gentrification in New York and how expensive accommodation was in New York. And I was like, can't relate, babs. As much as I couldn't afford being in the space that I was in when I was thinking this house in Stellenbosch, the rent was ridiculous for a student, and I myself could not afford the rent. I was involving myself in things that I couldn't afford, but at the same time could not recognize that, hey, I am in the same thing. It's just I couldn't. Maybe I could still afford it at the time. Maybe that was the thing, but over the years, and especially since I've been more intentional about working from the rural areas and building in the rural areas, I have realized that I do also experience gentrification. In fact, my whole life has been gentrified. My whole life has been gentrified. The access to the beaches and stuff like that has been gentrified. I'm not saying I had access to it before, but the space, the way in which I can access and engage with the space is definitely shaped by profit interest than it is by people interest. And it's been a bit of a reality check for me, or a wake up call, because I realized that like rural innovation has been gentrified almost on a global scale. Examples like this: rural innovation versus environmentally friendly innovation. So a really great example of African innovation for me, which I'm thinking as rural innovation, is the changes of the mud huts over time. So I don't know if it's just Zulu people or African people all over. We all used to build like those grass huts, you know, called standards. If you've watched Ushaga Ilembe, the series, you will have seen those huts. They are actually absolutely beautiful. I can't even imagine how cool it is inside the thing. And I'm sure it just stays regulated all the time. However, that had its own challenges. In times of war, all it takes for an enemy to burn everything that you have is a match. You know, it was all good and well before we had matches. And so to avoid all of this and sort of save some of the infrastructure in case an enemy does this, the walls were raised with mud. And grass was still used to make it strong, and stones and all kinds of other things, and clay types of soil. But also the walls were raised, and I'm sure there were different lengths over time. And there was a length when people were like, okay, this is the length, and the grass top roofing was still incorporated. That eventually evolved into like those thatched roomed house. Like it wasn't just circular anymore. People were moved to those like room spaces because it saves time. When it's raining, you don't have to go outside to talk to people and stuff. So it made sense. And the grass thatching was still incorporated. And there's still ways where people even now use, what is it called? There's like stairs, or a lower level and an upper level. There's ways in which like food was stored way back when, and there's ways in which like farming was done way back when, and we'll get into that in a different episode. But housing specifically for me, like that was like innovation in Africa, and all of the materials that were needed to build those types of houses and structured were resources that were readily available in terms of what is needed in human capacity, but also in terms of what is needed for like raw materials, grass, soil, and all of that stuff. And building a house took effort. It just took effort. It wasn't about resources and anything else. If you weren't able, then maybe like able-bodied, then maybe you'd have a problem. But otherwise, everything was ready available for you to be able to stay alive. There's something called uksisa nesiZulu. It's when you borrow somebody an animal so that when you borrow somebody animals so that they can breed, and then the offspring they can keep, so that they can start breeding their own animals or livestock. And that's to help like everybody stay self-sufficient without being like dependent on somebody for the basics like milk and meat and stuff like that. And housing just stood out for me as like one of the spaces where you can see sort of the transitions in how people created, or in how like African people used space and created space. And now we find ourselves where we are buying all of the materials that we need for housing and space and living, but we can't afford it. We don't have the systems in place to financially afford participating in these systems and institutions. And it becomes a bit of a catch-22 where we we can't participate in the rest of the systems and make money, and so we can't save money or make money to innovate so that we are better able to participate in these like institutions. And it sucks a bit that we're in this space, but I think before like it becomes another thing that is completely driven by the West and looks like a Western concept, I think Africans need to like look within, find their answers, and be proud of who we were, because that's where we come from. And now it's like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And mud huts, oh, it's temperature regulated, but like not even 10 years ago, like those were the photos of mud huts were being used as poverty porn to like solicit funding by big NPOs and NGOs and Lord knows what, you know. So now that it's rebranded from the West as eco-certified, now it's worth it. And now that it's worth it, there's all these legalities and barriers to entry that African people cannot access and go through, because our resources have been limited by design in the past. So we find ourselves jumping through hoops to satisfy a standard that we'll never meet. And if we were true to our context and our lived experiences, perhaps we wouldn't be taken for a ride so easily, because there's so many people that are employed and working in corporates and, you know, working towards a house like in the city or a flat and something. And I'm just like, even me, maybe a part of me wants it, but that's not my primary goal, because for me it looks so unsustainable. Rates, you never stop paying rates, and you therefore have to have a source of income until essentially you die. And that is scary for me about cities, you know, or urban spaces in general. As much as they're great, like parts of innovation and stuff, the rural context, I feel like, offers something different. And if we can look within and have conversations with older people in our communities, we can really discover that like how far removed we are from the things that we need, and how easily attainable those things are still for some of us, if we only take a moment and look. And I've done this in under 15 minutes. Thank you for joining me.